Hello, my name is Tosca Bruno van Vijwijken and I work with the Transnational NGO Initiative. Today we're hosting a visitor, James Crowley, and he is an associate with Accenture Development Partnerships, which he'll explain in a moment what that is, and formerly senior partner with Accenture, the well-known management consulting company, which he'll tell us more about. Thank you, James, for allowing us to interview you today. This will be helpful for students as well as faculty. So let's talk a little bit about the issues that you have worked with in your long career. Tell us a little bit about the nature of your work and how that has evolved towards in the last 10 years so working with NGOs.
I transitioned from, I guess, the commercial practice in Accenture in 2005, where I worked for a long time, and I still run the strategy practice in UK and worked in the energy sector. I guess I got to a point where, whilst I loved consulting and problem solving and actually liked Accenture as well, had been there for a long time, that I guess I wanted to get involved in stuff which I felt was a bit more worthwhile and not all about making money and partly about giving back, but also tackling new problems that I hadn't tackled before and using the skills and the tools which I'd built up over many years, but applying them to a different context that I thought were a bit more worthwhile. So that was the transition. And it just so happened that the Accenture Development Partnerships little group, which is a small group attached to Accenture, which works with non-profits, normally people come on secondment out of the main practice and go back to their day jobs after 6 months or whenever the project is finished. But I joined and worked with those and worked with, I've done I guess projects now for, I guess, a dozen of the largest international NGOs.
I see.
Over the last 8 years.
I see. And just for those of us who don't know what Accenture was, I mean, 10 years ago, I wouldn't have known that. Tell us what that is.
It's a pretty ginormous management consulting organization that does everything from systems building, outsourcing to strategy consulting in most of pretty much the developed countries around the world. So the degree to which it works in Africa is really only in those countries that look much more like Amsterdam or London. So, so Johannesburg or parts of Nigeria,
I see.
and etc., and not so much in the developing world.
I see.
And ADP is the mirrored image of that. It's working in all the other places that Accenture doesn't do its core business.
Right.
But I worked in the strategy bit, which is a small part of the bigger integrated whole of Accenture.
Yes, yes. And who are Accenture's main competitors in the sector at this point? Because you're a very large player. Accenture,
at this stage, it's a bit frightening. It employs, I think, 250,000 people.
Wow.
Which is huge. About 100,000 in India, doing outsourcing and systems building and building software and all those sorts of things that I don't understand. And then another 150,000 around the world. So it's in terms of who is this like, it's like a bit of the IBM that's not about boxes, including McKinsey and Booz Allen and all those sorts of people. So I guess in terms of size and scale, IBM and Accenture are the two biggest management consulting firms.
I see.
By size and revenues and all those sorts of stuff. All the other guys are much smaller, Booz Allen and McKinsey and BCG. You know, there are lots of people do niches of what Accenture does. Where Accenture is this big, integrated, pervasive.
Right, right. And we know from our research that some big INGOs do use some of the service either pro bono or for pay of Accenture, as well as the others that you mentioned. So how did you first become interested in doing consulting with INGOs? What was that all about?
Well, I think it was just a marriage of convenience in the beginning. I knew I wanted to move on from the commercial consulting to something around the not-for-profit something. It turned out that the guy who runs the ADP group was a former friend and one of my group in the core practice. Gib Bullock, a great guy. And so Gib said, why don't you try out working with us? So my first project was with Plan International, reviewing leadership and management practices across the globe. So it gave me a chance to meet all of their 80 country directors, travel to Kenya, to South Africa, to Egypt, to Senegal, to Ghana, and meet with their loads of people within their teams in the countries, which I found fascinating. So that really gave me an eye-opener about the issues which were in some ways much the same as any other organisation across the patch. There's also what was quite different about development. And so I've loved working in the sector actually, because it's different and it's stimulating, and there's some great people. The challenges in some ways are similar, but the context in which you do those projects is slightly more fluid and spongy than in USA or UK.
Right.
Lots of moving parts in
Right.
political context, economic context, the social context, and everything else which you need to get to grips with. But the whole thought process about how you design interventions and make interventions in developing countries that have any chance of succeeding, I find fascinating.
So you already started referencing some of the core challenges that those NGOs that you work with. Hey? You mentioned PLAN, you've mentioned World Vision, AMRETH and others, CARE. In your work in consulting with them, what do you see as some, let's say, 2 or 3 of their core challenges that they have been facing over the 10 years or so that you've worked with them, and how are they dealing with those challenges? Or not dealing with those challenges?
Okay, it's a big question. I think in many ways they've made a lot of progress. They've grown, they have expanded their presence, they've built their skills, they've built their capability. They're involved in many different issues that health and education and livelihoods and microfinance in many different places. So they've grown, and in some ways, I guess, they're victims of their success because starting out as a small NGO that's focused on one thing in one area. It's easy to kind of work out what to do. At least it's easier to work out what to do. But when you're certainly working in 99 countries like World Vision, in all the domains, then the regions come into play because it's very broad. But the effort to coordinate and to manage and to combine all those things together is not easy. And I think they've all been, be it PLAN, Save the Children or World Vision, they've all been tackling their success for the last 5 or 10 years.
Yeah.
And so, in my words, they're now too big to be small. So they're no longer can get away with we're small, nimble, because they're actually quite big organisations.
Yeah.
World Vision employs 20,000 people plus.
Yeah.
And it's 3 billion revenues every year. So they're too big to be small, but in the same scheme, they're too small to be big, in that the costs that are required and the investment to get alignment and to get joined up systems and joined up methodology and joined up ways of working and joined up HR processes. And that's what they're facing at the moment. And there's lots of organizational barriers and governance barriers to doing that. And so I think you're seeing all of them trying to say, well, if we're going to be big, then we need to actually realize the benefits of being big. So having some standardized approaches to dealing with problems. So if we know that doing a certain project approach in a certain context is best done this way, that's how we do it across the world, and not have 50 different ways of doing it. And the benefit of that, of course, is that you can compare and learn and then improve the standard over time, rather than having different approaches everywhere. So that's one of the big issues that they're dealing with, is to become integrated and combined and aligned at the same time as keeping innovation going and keeping it as an exciting place to work, which I think they can, but it's not easy.
And when it comes to how to define effectiveness for big INGOs like that, how do you, as a management consultant, see them trying to figure out what effectiveness means for them, and how do they try to assess that?
That's also a big question, and something that they are all having to tackle with as donors more and more kind of interrogate them for evidence of results, and donors try to interrogate them for the logic of what they're going to do and how what they're going to do contributes to long-term sustainable results. And at the same time, if you're doing hundreds of projects and thousands of projects across the globe, how do you somehow aggregate the overall effect of all of that and count it up? And of course, all these projects are different types of projects. Some are advocacy, some are building schools, some are building capacity of government departments. They're all different. So actually, you're counting different things. But I think the issue which they have to get to is to be able to categorize on a scale of 1 to 10 what's a good project and what's not a good project based on a pre-set of criteria, and be able to have a transparent way of judging what a good project is, so that people understand it, so that they get aligned about what good and bad looks like, and they can learn as they go forward. And that's entirely doable, and it's not that different than any other industry in reality. But it's something that's not trivial, and requires a bit of a step change, I think.
A step change, as you say,
for NGOs.
As you say in your book, Building a Better NGO. So last question then, when it comes to leadership skills, both the informal as well as formal skills for leadership, what do you think are crucial skills for leaders in the INGOs that you've worked with? What does it mean for them to be a good leader?
I think leadership skills and leadership behaviours is an important cog in the process of them getting better. And my honest view is that leadership behaviours in the NGO sector perhaps is not as brilliant as I had expected to be.
I see.
Given the mission and the, if you like, the nobleness of the profession that people in. Even though there's some fantastic people with great skills and great talents. But the first thing I would say is that leadership is not about an individual in these organisations. Leadership is a fabric in terms of how people behave and how people look after their people, and how people take responsibility for performance, and how they work in a collegiate way in making decisions. So it gets intertwined with accountability. It gets intertwined around structure, I would like to see them get to the point where I guess the leadership behaviours become much more positive and progressive, and I'd like them to get to the point where they grow leaders at the top from within, and I'd like them to get to the point where the other parts of their makeup, be it systems, processes, structure, accountability, programmatic approach, theory of change, is all kind of reinforcing the right leadership behaviours, because I think that's required.
Interesting. Well, thank you so much for this interview. I appreciate it.
You're very welcome.